it's 4:14 on Monday, the 28th of February, 2022. Clinton, would you call roll, please?
Dale Priester.
Here.
Doug Parks. He is an excused absent for out-of-town work. James Bond.
Here.
Here. Karen Goodman.
Here.
Good.
And Kelly Tomaszewski is absent with an emergency at the hospital right now.
Unfortunately, that happens on a regular basis. All right, Clinton, are there any amendments to the agenda?
No amendments to the agenda.
And our public just walked out, so we have no comments on item 3.
Okay.
The consent agenda, I would accept a motion to approve same.
Bond so moves.
Seconded.
All right. Any questions about any of it? If not, all those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. And then item number 5. The resolutions, the financial reports.
Those were approved in the
Yes, and
Consent.
old business, there is none. But
Correct.
now we get to the meat of the meeting of the resolutions. Resolution 2201, write-off of doubtful accounts. Has everybody gotten an explanation?
that was approved under the consent agenda.
Okay. Is that concluded? Yes. Right.
Yes, we did that under the
So
consent
we do not
agenda.
need to have a. Oh, yes, it was.
But-
You're right. Absolutely.
Yeah,
So
but the other 3 are not.
just one question, Clinton, on the 2 big doubtful accounts. Is there any chance of recovery at all?
Pretty close to 0 because of the pandemic issues related to them and trying to collect.
It is what it is.
Yeah,
The number, however, has dropped considerably.
yes.
Yeah, which is, I assume it's a good sign.
Mm-hmm.
All right, resolution 7B, resolution 2202, adoption of the domestic violence grant operating budget. And we have it in the on the agenda, or in the program. Anything different than we've done in the past, Clinton?
No, that is exactly the same as we've had in the past. That is pretty well limited on change just because of the program and the funding from MISTA that we had.
That is MISTA, right?
Yeah, that's the MISTA program.
I thought there was a time limit on that.
Yes,
Time limit, is it?
well,
We started off with a long period of time.
40-year forgivable loan, 25% forgiven every 10 years. And we have gone through 10 years on each of the houses, so we only have 30 years left on the forgiveness of the loan.
All right.
So, and just to follow through on that, as long as we maintain the homes to be used for victims of domestic violence as permanent housing, then we fulfill the program requirements and the loan will be forgiven. The only problem we're having is that when the program began, they provided a different set of rules on, Michigan did, on how we charged rent. And probably about 5-6 years ago, they changed that on us where they are pushing those rents to closer to market rent instead of subsidized. Yeah, they're not subsidized, but that we could charge lesser rent or give 0 rent for a few months to help the families out and stuff. And we have one family right now that we're trying to put together enough information to request Michigan not to raise the person's rent right now. So it is tough.
They're kind of destroying the rationale behind the program, are they not?
That's my feeling. That's why I want to take it to them and we have been successful in the past arguing with them to, and we are behind still. They're expecting the houses to be what, Lindsay and Cindy, about 1,200 a month, 12 or 13, is close to.
I think the last market survey was 1,060 something.
Okay.
And just a 3-bedroom.
All right. So that's pretty high, and I think our highest rent right now is what, 7 something?
It's 8 right now.
8. Okay. So, that's difficult given the life situation of the families that we have in those homes, that they're being faced with close to, if not market rent. And if Mishta had his preference, each of those homes would be at market rent. So we just continue to fight against it every time we can and try to keep the rent as low as we can.
I couldn't, I didn't get to print out all the copies, but do we have, okay, so we're trying to approve or agree to this resolution for this grant. And you're telling me that there's been some changes in regards to.
No, we already have the grant.
Okay,
We have the, we got those in 2007. And I think the last time we signed the mortgage papers were in late 2008, I think. So we have it, and Mishta was audited by HUD on all their programs, and this is one that they had totally forgotten about and not done anything with for well near a decade, and then all of a sudden they took interest in it again, and now they're trying to push, all these changes and try to have it function as one of their subsidized programs. However, they no longer put any money into it. So, but technically by the mortgages, they own the lease. However, I've asked them to take the properties back when they didn't like how we operated them, and they don't take them back either. So, we operated those probably for the first half dozen years with the same, because it was set up that we use the same rent calculation as we would for public housing.
We never looked at it as a revenue enhancing.
Right, and so it was meant to help, to get these families back on their feet and stuff. And when we, from the get-go, we did annual exams with them to check their rent and everything and see where things were at, and they had to report income to us and income loss. But then they moved it over to, we still do annual exams, but they changed the whole rent calculation up to their normal rent calculation for multifamilies that they do.
Well, that's a bit disappointing to hear, but nonetheless, we have to have a motion to adopt resolution 2022-02 for the domestic violence grant operating budget. May I have a motion, please?
I so move.
Second?
second it.
Any further questions? If not, all those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None. Item C, 2022-03, adoption of the 2022 Public Housing Program operating budget, which I'm sure you all had a copy of, multiple pages of it. Are there any questions on it? Is there
Well,
any
if
explanation
someone
necessary?
will move it, I would like to give a little explanation of how this budget, what this budget is now, and what it looks like, and so on. So if someone will put it on the table. Okay, Jim has put it on the table.
What page do we start on there?
Well, the operating budget itself, I'm trying to think here. It's on page 121
Okay.
of 160. The
There it is.
as of February 1, the public housing program, which used to contain Century Terrace, Harborview, and all the scattered sites, became public housing only of the scattered sites. Because Century Terrace and Harborview moved into HUD multifamily project-based rental assistance tax credit program. So they are no longer, even though we have a portion I need you to approve of that budget, under the direct oversight of the commissioners. This public housing budget is for the scattered sites. That's why for those who are used to seeing well over $1 million on the budget, now see a much less of a budget because it's for the scattered sites. We have not done round 2, phase 2 of the scattered sites yet. So this budget has the calculated amount of operating fund to be supplied by HUD for the 2022 calendar year to us, along with the calculated expenses based on the same way that Cindy and I have been calculating the expenses for several years to know what they should be. They represent, geez, what's the flip side of, I can't think here in my head with math right now. They represent 22.3% of what used to be the public housing budget, whole public housing budget, because now this is just the budget of the scattered sites.
$335,000 is the 22%, is that what I'm looking at?
Where are you at?
Right.
What are you saying, Dale?
The third line from the bottom, the $335,000 is 22% of the operating budget, is that what it is?
That's 22% of what used to be
Yeah.
the entire operating budget. Yes.
Any anomalies in there we need to worry about? Probably not.
No, I don't think so. Majority of our capital funds are available to help keep them going forward until we get over to phase 2. But otherwise, it's reflective of what normally is within our public housing budget.
Okay, then we need a resolution, a motion to adopt resolution
Well, I need a
2022-03.
second. Jim put it on the table,
Right.
Okay,
so.
do we have one on our motion on the table? All right. Second, somebody?
I'll second it.
All right. Any other questions? If not, all those in favor of adopting resolution 2203, the public housing operating budget, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution 2022-04, adoption of the 2022 operating fund support of the CTHV LLC.
Yes. Let's do that same thing again, and let me provide background for everyone.
Sure, go ahead.
Someone put it on? Jim? Okay.
Something like.
All right. We closed on the RAD conversion project on December 7, 2021, much later than the anticipated September 1. That effect on the budget made it such that the subsidized support for the program through the project-based rental assistance from HUD, the contract for that would not begin until February 1 of 2022. Because it began on February 1, 2022, and not at January 1, 2022, the funding cycle for that program does not begin until January 1, 2023. So in order to make the funds available for Century Terrace and Harborview to operate the subsidies to keep it from HUD to operate, HUD determined that if you look at the memo that I wrote, that $477,799 of former public housing operating funds plus $260,598 of capital funds would be invested into the program to provide the missing rent subsidy, because the HAP contract, the PBRA, does not begin until January 1, 2023. So the CTHV, which operates Century Terrace and Harborview, needs the income from HUD of $708,397. Now, that had already been approved and stamped and required by HUD and the investor and the attorneys before anybody could sign on December 7th, 2021. However, in February and March, depending on the year, this year was February, we had to supply HUD with our operating fund tool, which is the request for public housing funding. And we had to submit for the public housing, our scattered sites, and then for Century Terrace and Harborview for the public housing fund that HUD had already promised to support that program in 2022. Darren and I, our accountant, have submitted that information into HUD. A regulatory requirement is that the board approves a budget resolution that supports the funding request. I spoke with persons in the training I was involved with from Washington, and also with our persons at the Detroit field office. They all consulted the HUD attorneys, and because by the setup, this board does not have the authority to approve or not approve the CTHV budget. But HUD regulations are requiring, because HUD promised these funds, that the board approve the public housing operating fund and capital funds that HUD had already allocated to be used for CTHV LLC. Have I lost anybody yet on this one?
I'm still hanging on.
Okay. So even though there is a full-scale budget, I can't remember if I included it. Yeah, we included it in the packet here. That you can see this budget for CTHV represents 77.7% of what used to be our public housing budget. The monies coming in from HUD, there is the first line highlighted in yellow, rent subsidy of $708,397. Those are the monies that HUD had promised. The resolution before you authorizes Dale to sign the board resolution that is required by HUD regulation for these funds then to flow to Century Terrace and Harborview. And I need to submit them then to the field office so that they can process the request. They can't do, the field office cannot adjust what HUD's already approved, so the funds will be approved according to what was signed on December 7th, but they cannot approve it until they have the full packet, which is the Excel tool that had everything listed of income and expenses submitted, along with the board resolution signed by Dale on that. sort of a rock and a hard place situation, but that's probably the easiest explanation I can give for where we're at on that. If you have any questions, I can try to,
Well, essentially, this has to be approved.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or we're broke.
yeah.
We're just hiring a couple extra people in Washington to do this.
So we're not floating anything, we have to put this in for reimbursement.
Right, what happens is the money will go into our electronic account at HUD under the name of the City of Manistee Housing Commission. I download it and we put it into our only account that's allowable at West Shore, that is the public housing account. Then, once it's in the account, then I authorize Cindy to cut a check from CMHC to CTHV, which then puts it into Century Terrace and Harborview's account. And then, it gets really hairy from here, we put all the income in there, and then we submit. We are hired, the Housing Commission is hired by Riverside Housing Incorporated, which is owned by the City of Manistee Housing Commission, but they are the managing day-to-day partner of the property. We submit an invoice to ourselves that requests reimbursement for what we paid for to do. But we have to show all of the moving of the money from one account to another and back into the other. And it's been a real headache trying to figure all this out, on that. But what this will essentially do then is allow, on a monthly basis, me to transfer these funds, or authorize Cindy to cut the check, and then Lindsay and either Dale or Doug, or one of the two authorized signers for the Housing Commission, signs the check. Then we deposit it into CTHV. Then we redeposit it back into the Housing Commission.
And all of this is necessary because the papers were not signed when they should have been signed.
And that all happened because of Eagle, because they would not sign off on a remediation program that had been approved by their field officers for the small amount of radon, and there was a trace amount of chloroform gas, which comes from being along a riverbank. And a remediation program had been prepared and had been approved. However, it had not been signed off by the person with the authority to sign off on. And finally, we probably still wouldn't have it signed off on it if it hadn't been that Commonwealth found an attorney that they knew in Detroit who had encountered these problems and had found a way to get to the boss to make the signatures happen. And that's how HUD couldn't even get Eagle to move. So, but that Eagle held us up from September 1 until December 7th,
Unconscionable.
Yeah, it is,
I lost my train of thought. All right, we have a resolution on the floor. May we have an adoption of?
I just need a second, which I,
Did we get a second?
okay,
Yeah, we got a
all right.
second.
Then we just need the
All
vote.
in favor of resolution 2204, adoption of the 2022 operating fund support for CTHV LLC? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Are we through with the new business?
Yes, we are.
Reports and communications.
The first item on our reports and communication, we don't have any communications that have arrived, but delayed from our January meeting was The special discussion that I had prepared on repairing the 2 buildings, 3 units of our scattered sites. The one at 343 and 343 and a half 10th, and the home at 1717 Vine Street. I'm going to make the assumption everyone had now the opportunity to read the documentation, you know, on that, and thought maybe we can enter into some discussion or answer any questions, or, you know, I just wanted to put it before the commissioners. This is not an action item. This is, you know, a discussion item. This is what we need to look at, all the scatter sites for phase 2 of addressing.
The 10th Street, wasn't that a later addition?
The first round, and I forget the exact order, the first round of scattered sites homes were from the development of Century Terrace.
Right.
Back in '68. Then in '72, Harborview was created, and then the final amount of scattered site homes were added at that point. My memory serves me correctly, the Vine Street area up by the Reeds Park is the part that was added initially with Century Terrace. And then the homes that we have on 12th and Cypress and 10th and 9th, I'm forgetting a street, 6th, yep. And then over on Jefferson were added with Harborview. Also to keep in mind is those homes were troop barracks from was it Oscoda? A decommissioned ballistic missile base up north, yeah. So they were DOD approved homes for their troops, not meant to be permanent homes. And so they all were fabricated, and HUD purchased them, and then they moved them down here and set them up on slabs down here. So we got the seconds from the Department of Defense on that. And they're all in pretty poor shape, except for the 2 units that we were able to build during ARA, during the first term of President Obama. And 1703 and 1717.
Right next to each other.
I don't know, they got weird addresses. They don't look like any of our other homes up there in the Vine Street area. They're so 2 individual duplexes that are 2 bedrooms that we were able to build with the ARA funds that were granted to us. Those homes, they need some updating and fixing up. The last time I was in there with the mayor and city manager, just to address some tenant damage and living things that have happened up there. But the others have varying degrees of need of replacement. Nothing as bad as the units listed here, but many near that, depending on how a tenant, may leave that. I have, since our new city manager has been here, meet with Bill monthly, and to address issues at the Housing Commission, affordable housing, housing in the city, and so on. And last Friday, when we met and discussed, we just floated some ideas about how to address the scattered sites phase 2, you know, and looking at out of the box ways of finding areas in the community that, I don't know, blending different kinds of housing, you know, levels, you know, together, you know, addressing issues of where neighborhoods don't want those people, that is poor people, you know, in their neighborhood, you know, anything that we can to think outside the box, you know, to address our issues and for the scattered sites, but also the need for housing in the city of Manistee on a whole scale of affordability, you know, from those who always will be renters at some level to new homeowners and stuff. So we're trying to explore different avenues.
Do we have any relationship with Habitat for Humanity?
We have somewhat of a relationship. Karen, I know, is quite involved with Habitat. I know that they had expressed some interest earlier in the property on 10th Street. Our problem is we can't sell off one property at a time without having a plan in place of what we're going to do with the public housing subsidy for those units, because if we don't meet the 2-year guideline, then the community loses the subsidy from HUD for very low and extremely low income families. And that's something over the 17 years I've been here, the commission has been loath to do, to give up the subsidy from HUD on any of our public housing units. So we can't sell one of them outright unless we're at some point where we have figured out a one-for-one replacement. Now, I'm starting to think, based on some readings I've encountered, that even though it might be nice to do it all in one big chunk, maybe there is a way of finding different sources of funding to do a one-for-one that isn't an all-for-one, you know, kind of deal. So I'm trying to find some resources that might allow for that, so that we can address the needs of some of our worst units sooner than getting an all-for-one block. What are some of the issues that we face on the RAD conversion right now for the scattered sites? The main one is walkability. That score is really difficult for small communities like ours. It makes sense in urban communities. It doesn't, in my mind, work well, you know, here. The scoring for walkability out at our current Reach Park area, which is large enough to be reconfigured to get all of our scattered sites into that area, into different kinds of townhomes and smaller units and such, we would not get a high score on the walkability, and it would cancel out the score we get for public housing preservation. We go under a different funding slot of development, which is public housing preservation. And I forget the exact number of points, but let's say it's 6. And walkability is, I think, 4 points or something like that. Well, we wouldn't get maybe but 1 point or none on that. We would lose, you know, 2 to 3 points off of our, and to be sure to get the funding, you got to have the highest score, you know, possible going in. I think if Filer Township addresses some of the things that they have in their plan in that area, that certainly would help walkability scores for people, but I'm not sure exactly when that, would be happening. What doesn't make sense, and I don't confess to fully understanding how walkability scores are complete. I know there's a program you got to go to, and you put your address in, and it plops down where it is. When you think about it, though, our sites are not that far from Family Fair and from 2 different drugstores, right there, and from the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, which is still in the former Kmart parking lot behind, McDonald's. But it scores lower than, Century Terrace and Harborview scored high, well, because at the time we had to save a lot, that was helping out, on the score. And the dot for walkability was much closer to where Century Terrace and Harborview is. I can't remember the exact corner that that dot was placed on. But
Some of that is sidewalks, having
Yeah.
sidewalks available compared to, we can, in rural areas, we know how to get to places, you walk on the side of the road sometimes, but this program, which we've talked to the governor's office about, it's unfair to rural Michigan.
Yeah.
And so we've asked for this to be reviewed so that we aren't penalized we can walk to places. Like you said, you can walk over to DHHS,
yeah.
just not a sidewalk all the way there.
Mhm. Well, and in my mind, we have one of the very best dollar ride situations that I've ever encountered. And we get no credit whatsoever. We're allowed to provide a letter of support from the Manistee County Dollar Ride, but it's just a letter of support. I don't know many communities our size that has a door-to-door delivery, that has a regular running route routines going to people, that has driver service that is focused on the people that they are serving, that went out of their way like they did during the pandemic to get food delivered to people. We get no credit, none whatsoever, and hopefully, Karen, when the governor relooks at that, they need to look at, does the community have a mass transit situation that mollifies some of these lack of sidewalks, because we certainly do.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, the obvious community support for Dial Ride, as evidenced by this bond issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because you can get taken to your doctor's appointment at a certain time and picked up, and I've watched the drivers, be sure that people get in and out, of the building and are properly seated, in the bus. We've got something to be very proud of, but we're not getting recognized, for that. I think there needs to be a look at when they do the next write-up on the QAP for MISHDA, that perhaps they have a QAP for urban areas and a QAP for rural areas, like ours. Because I can understand in urban areas they want to get focused on, developing areas that don't have food deserts and other things like that. But, we have a food desert right now since Save-A-Lot, left. But, we have the transit system, that helps out. And we even have, I think, at least one taxi service, in our community. So we need to be recognized for that point-wise, in getting the funding. So at this point, we don't plan to make a submission to MISHDA until the April 1 submission of 2023, to give time for Bill and I to identify some areas, within the community, how we might develop partnerships to work on thinking outside the box on the housing in the areas of our community, and explore what other funding might be available. And also, I want to sit down, Jonathan, our developer, does too, with not just the planner who is hired from the county to serve the city, but also the county planner. Because, now we recognize that we don't necessarily have to do one for one all within the city of Manistee.
That was gonna be my question, because I think of the corridor going north even. You have all your medical services, you have a major grocery store, pharmacy,
Yeah.
doctors, and there's some property out there that's kind of being looked at.
Yeah. And so, I know that there would be a preference to keep it all in the city, but it was very difficult, the last round we went through. And if there is another place in the county that we could locate all of them, or we may want to be really experimental and say we want to put so many over, and I'm just throwing out places, Wellston and Caliva, and there's no reason that we can't,
Right.
if we're able to find the correct funding source to do that, to spread out the affordable level of housing that we have throughout the county. So I want to kind of give it all insight, and so when I meet with the planners, I want to say, identify for me places in the county we can put all of them, or good places to break up and say we're going to put so many here, so many there, and let's start looking at it from that level. Because there have been, over the years I've been here, people who have moved in from out county into Manistee because this is where the public housing was. I had plenty of conversations when I first arrived with Mitch about why do the poor keep coming into city. Well, that's where the services are, and that's where things are that they can, afford. No one plants the services out, where they are. So maybe we need to reverse some of that.
Well, and I think of some of the people who came into the city and don't like it. They'd rather be out in the county. But the counties have, I think about Caliva, and it's like, okay, they've got, the Dollar Tree there, or whatever that is, Dollar General or something. I mean, they have resources there. Wellston has a doctor's office. You do have resources in those smaller communities. So making maybe numerous smaller footprints, that allow for some affordability, but also some choice.
Right.
Would be nice. I mean, Caliva's going to have this, community complex now.
Yes.
I mean, what a great thing. They're just moving like
Yeah.
crazy, building, their resources within their community.
Yeah.
Yeah, some good ideas.
It would also take away the concentrated statement of those people.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd really like to get beyond that and get to our neighbors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I've lived here for 30 years. People on the hill look down on the north side. And the north side looks down on Century Terrace, Harborview. Everybody has to pick on somebody.
Yeah. I would like it to be different, though.
well, I think that it always requires change. And, there's numerous levels to this, but just in a big picture view, some people, as time goes on, don't even know how to care for their own personal belongings or rooms or apartments or whatever. So I think that education is gonna be a piece, you know, it's like, how do you take care of your place? How do you clean? You know, picking up the garbage off the floor is not cleaning. You know, that's just picking up garbage. You know, you keep getting bed bugs or rodents or whatever, you know, it's like, it's because people aren't, taking care of their space, but some people just don't know how to take care of that space. Believe it or not, they don't know. So like having education programs that would allow people that responsibility. I think Century Terrace and Harborview have gotten a bad rap over the years because, you know, problems, you know, as we changed, then more difficult people with more problems moved into there, and they weren't managed. It wasn't, you know, and you're kind of tied. You know, I always wonder about should we have security there? You know, when it was older folks, 30-some years ago, you know, it was quiet and peaceful, but now you have this combination of people, which isn't bad, but they all have to be invested in the place, and we don't have that yet. And unfortunately, when people are really breaking the rules, and you've got a few, it's not that easy to just say, move, you know, because that is, it sounds kind of hard, but how else do you learn, you know?
Right.
Also, I think the renovation is going to address that.
Right.
There's a small esprit de corps, for lack of a better term, that I'm noticing in Harborview. Yes, there are people who say, I hate the black appliances. Well, move.
Yeah. It's like, well, that's, you know, if that's such a big thing, then again, it's just a shift in our societal way of doing things, you know. It's like, I don't like that, so you change for me instead of I change for you, you know, or radical acceptance, you know. It's black, okay.
Well, I think, maybe I'm being a little bit of a Pollyanna about this, but I think once the renovation of Century Terrace begins, that may alleviate some of the issues that we're having to deal with over there.
Well, and really hope that it raises the pride and investment, you know, of the residents of the building, that they don't look, their apartments don't look like some prison cell out of the 60s, you know.
Well,
But they
already
look like
I'm-
someone like a home, you know.
Yeah, already I'm hearing a lot of talk about what the landscaping change is going to be. So I think that same attitude may filter into Century Terrace,
Yep.
which will, I hope, eliminate some of the bad press.
Yes. Yeah.
But it will also come to a point of, you know, if people aren't going to do what they're supposed to do, we will track it and we will end that relationship, you know. That's all there is to it. It's a terrible thing when, you know, but you've got what, 300 compared to 1, you know. It's like the
Right.
needs of many compared to the 1. And give people every opportunity. Give them every opportunity you can, but you know, you never want to walk away saying, "Oh, if only I would have done this." You know, it's like,
But
I think we do a good job at.
There's whole parts of the system, though, that need to be addressed in that. In the judicial system, to be able to help support making that change for the many and not just for the one. And with like legal aid and stuff, they become focused as the counselors of the one family and not the many, and always want to cut a deal to keep people in or find a way that by regulations you can't, you know, evict, you know, someone, rather than appreciate, you know, everything we're bringing to the table about why this person is here for eviction, and their effect on the households of the building, you know.
Health
Yeah.
and safety.
Yeah, that needs to change too, because as long as legal aid confronts always that we're in the wrong in trying to evict someone, what landlord would want to evict someone just to evict them? You know, you
Right.
depend on good, reliable residents.
And anything that we can think of when we're thinking out of the box, you know, to come up with to remove that eviction process, you know, and being able to, you know, it's like not let people get to that point. Anything that we can think of to put something in there, an educator or a peer support or, you know, whatever we do, these mentors or any of those kind of things, to give people those opportunities. I know nobody wants to evict anybody, but there are times where it's like, okay, well, how many more times can we spray for this?
Yeah.
Or, you know, I hear people saying they're afraid to come out of their apartments because so-and-so lives down, you know, and it's like, we can't have that either. You know, I don't want somebody's
Right.
grandma afraid to come out of her apartment. That's not appropriate.
Yeah.
So as we think out of the box, I think we have layers to think about on what we can do.
Yeah.
All right.
The other item I had put together for discussion was sort of the ownership structure of Harborview and Century Terrace. And what I did with it was I began with where we want to be in what year, I got to remember where I began with, in January 2037. I don't plan to be around then. These two fine colleagues of mine, I'm sure will be around, but I won't be. But it's at that point where we're at the position that we purchase the buildings back from CTHV, and they fall under not as public housing, but as under ownership of Riverside Housing, which is owned by the Housing Commission. And it comes full circle. And that's just the whole process of the tax credit piece. I had heard some concern from some city council members that there was no ownership left in the buildings or the land. Well, we have a land lease that was used as a portion of collateral, but yet we still own the land. It's just part of the financing deal. And we received a upfront payment for the land lease for the 15-year period at the time, you know, of closing. But as we move forward to 2037, the first marker is in 5 years, we will be managing everything directly, including the project-based rental assistance and the tax credit. And that gives us all the nervous headaches that we can think of right now, but that's the first big move, you know, for us. So we're 100% control of the 0.01% that we own of CTHV LLC. The rest is owned by law by Sinair, our investor, until year 15 is over with. But it took a lot of work and structuring to meet the goals of the commissioners, which was maintain local control, maintain these properties for the long haul, and not allow them to be sold off to some developer for condos or anything like that down the road. Well, we have a program that every 15 years we can get a refresh of funds from MSHDA to update our buildings. We have a contract now from HUD that provides us, beginning in January 2023, more rental subsidy than we've ever seen for Century Terrace and Harborview, which means we have more money for ongoing maintenance, ongoing updates that need to be addressed, and not have to wait until some big cash fall, years in the making, to get us there. So we have more money to maintain the properties than we've ever had. And the Housing Commission remains in ultimate control, because at any point in the 15 years, to remove us out of the cycle of investment is going to be extremely difficult legally. So we are a deeply integrated partner of this. I have our attorneys really to thank on this. They went to battle. Melissa told me from day one, she says, what you guys want, it's going to be hard. You're going to have to find an investor that agrees to it. But bless her heart, and Eric from Reno and Kavanaugh, anytime Commonwealth or Senair raised issues about the plan and stuff, they brought forth, this is what needs to be done, here's how it can be done. They got rid of all the roadblocks. It got to the point where even Commonwealth's attorney was working with us when it had to be confronted with the investor. And then the investor got on board, and it became super easy. They understood where we were going and that everything had to return home here. There are several housing commissions in Michigan and throughout the country that have disappeared because they went to the RAD conversion, and at the end of the signing of all the papers, there was nothing left for the Housing Commission to do. They just absolutely disbanded, which meant all local investment in those properties were lost. And it's sad, in my mind, to see that happen when in the first place, it was the vision of this community to bring the public housing into the city. It needs to stay here because whose vision was it? The city. The federal government provided the opportunity, but if it wasn't for those who had the vision back in 1967, it wouldn't have been here. And I don't see how others had just let that go. You've got something good, and that needs to be perfected every single day, but it's still basically good. You don't give it away. You got to keep it, for the community. So I feel good about this. And at any time you have any questions about where we are in the process, how things are working, how things are, I have no problem bringing, information to you if you have questions about how's the financial health of CTHV. I can bring that information, to you. It's all available. You may see my signature now appearing sometimes as the executive director of the Housing Commission and the agent in charge of CTHV, just because it needs to be there to emphasize that both are running these properties. I don't want it to be just CTHV running it. It needs to be, for the face of the community, everything we're doing, us still there.
Let me just address this a little bit. You were deluged with hundreds of problems a week that none of us except Cindy and Lindsay and a few others know about. And to my experience, you have handled them all with grace and honesty and forbearance. So, thank you.
Thank you. I'm committed to our residents, really. I want the best for them, and It's hard. It's hard sometimes, and couldn't do it without my staff. There's just no way. This program is overwhelming, and you know, no way it could be done alone. But thank you, Jim. I appreciate that support for our staff.
And I think that, you know, that was kind of when you were talking about, you know, where we're going and how we're gonna add on. It's like, in my head, you know, I'm thinking, eventually you're gonna have to increase staff or look at the reorganization of it. And, I mean, there's just so many more pieces that are gonna come with this as we change.
We had a nice interview a week or so ago that the person wanted $4 more an hour than our budget would afford. And I had told Karen, I think before Christmas, or maybe it was right after. Anyways, I have a vision of wanting to hire a full-time social worker just for Century Terrace and Harborview. And the line item of the CTHV budget that I thought was going to afford that, I had miscalculated. I thought this was a fee that we could set aside on a monthly basis, but it was only an annual basis. So I went from having almost $50,000 in that line to having about $3,800 in that. I have not given up the vision. I'm now looking for ways of funding it. But years ago, we had a Ross grant. And one of the things that our people that were working for us under the Ross grant did was we would buy buckets and all the cleaning materials you could think of. And when a new family moved in, she would go either Century Terrace or Harborview, and she would bring them all these things. And, you know, those that needed help on learning how to clean, she would go weekly and help them clean, you know, and help them set goals on how to maintain. And we had some of the best housekeeping reports than we've ever had. And those who were in trouble with their housekeeping reports, she put special emphasis onto, and would go sometimes, you know, every other day just to check, you know, with them and help them learn. And we had a large amount of success, you know, with that. But we don't have the staff right now to be able to go out there and see where they're at. And there's so many needs that are with the residents of both buildings, you know, from, you know, cleaning to being ostracized from their family, you know, to having unmet medical needs because the family isn't there to help them get to understand that they need to go to a doctor or they need to fulfill this appointment and stuff, that we want somebody there. So I'm looking for funding to get someone in to do that.
There's a couple, I'm thinking of a couple grant series that I'll look at too, and some other funding sources. I'm thinking, I mean, I see the importance of a social worker maybe being able to do that, but I'm also wondering about a coordinator for you. Somebody who could kind of manage some of those, you know, the ostracized from family and stuff. That's family relationships, and sure, a social worker could probably be good in there, but maybe not being able to coordinate all your medical stuff could be a coordinator.
Yeah.
You know, so. But I've got some ideas I'll share with you.
Oh, that'll be
Yeah.
great. Because, you know, people could really, really benefit, you know, from that. We have so many varied needs in
Yeah.
both buildings.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, that concludes my report. I'm not sure if these individuals have anything they would like to share.
I don't have anything. Neither do I.
Quiet as mouses, but
Karen, have
busy
anything
as
else to
bees
add?
in the office.
I don't think so.
Move to adjourn, somebody.
So move.
All right. Consider yourself adjourned.
5:18 looks like.
send me an email in the morning, Clinton.
Well, don't leave here-
Remind me that I have to sign in with HUD.
Okay,
It's been
but also I
90
need you to
days.
sign here too.
You know.
It's not gonna get out that fast.
I don't want to keep track of me, but they did it.
So you have to sign in with ELOX tomorrow, is that it?
Well, I've got to sign in every 90 days to
Ah.
be able to approve you every 180 days.
Okay.
They probably just want to make sure I'm still breathing. I'm wondering something myself.
The ridiculousness.
You remind me of your mother.
I get that a lot.
You hear that a lot?
Yep. The older I get, the more it's like, oh my God.
All right, see you guys.
I got my mother. Shoot.
Every once in a while, when I talk about something, I'll say like, oh my God, Dorothy's here. I can hear her.
Yep.
See you, Clinton.
See you, Karen. Thank you. Thanks for running from one meeting to another tonight.
Appreciate it.
I was late though.
All right, look forward to talking to you.
Here's my packet. You can recycle it, okay?
Don't leave. All you gotta do, I put your
Okay.
name in and I put the date on there. All you gotta do is sign that box on that page. They're both the same. One is for public housing grant. I'm reading upside down. One is for CTHV. So,
Upstairs at my house, I've got a large packing case with all the documents on the